Welcome, everyone. I am very excited to be able to introduce our first speaker for the evening. Our first speaker is Carrey Bull. By way of introduction, Carrey Bull lives in Austin, Texas, with her very understanding and supportive wife, Meg, and 3 dogs. She is an Austin Fire Department Special Operations firefighter, which means she gets to hang on rope at work on occasion. She found her passion for caving after attending National Cave Rescue Commission Level 1 in Kentucky in 2015. Soon after, she found her way to the Underground Texas Grotto, some fun recreational trips, a few tank hauls, and a few expeditions. She hopes to have many more of all of these in the future. Carrey took as many NCRC classes as possible, and with the help of some awesome mentors, is now lucky enough to get to instruct for NCRC. She serves on the NCRC Education Committee as well. In her spare time, she sneaks in hikes and other adventures with Meg and knits when she can find time to sit still. Her favorite thing about caving is probably her caving family. I'd like you to please all welcome Carrey.
So if you're just joining us, then don't forget to mute yourself and then make sure that you have the chat open because we will have some audience participation in a little while. So today we are going to talk about patient packaging or how to wrap up your patient better than a Christmas gift. So to start off, we're going caving. And if you're anything like me, then maybe you haven't done this in a little while. I personally am really excited. So we're gonna do maybe a little rigging. We're gonna look at all the beautiful formations. We're gonna rest when we need to. Hopefully we'll get a little vertical. Maybe dream about the snacks we're going to eat at our next stop. But what if something happens? What if there's an accident, either to us or to someone else who's sharing the cave with us? So common accidents are usually falls. If you look at the American caving accidents data that Bonnie has put together, then you'll notice that the falls far outweigh any other types of accidents that cavers usually have. And those injuries that occur from those are usually in our extremities, so in our arms, in our legs. Occasionally people also get ill in the cave, whether that's from hypothermia or maybe a diabetic emergency of some sort. They can have seizures, cardiac problems. And then you'll notice in both columns, I put exhaustion, which is really neither an injury or an illness, but it can contribute to both. So someone is hurt or ill, so what are we going to do? It's time to make a plan, and your plan starts with the decision. So are we going to be able to walk out with our patient, or are we going to need to carry them out? And how do we decide? A lot of times that depends on patient condition, rescuer capabilities, which in this case is going to be us because we're the ones with the patient. Does anyone have medical knowledge? It's really important for cavers to have medical education and skills so that if something does happen, then we can be prepared to help out. And then lastly, it's going to be kind of experience that decides. So let's talk about walkouts first. This is where your patient self-rescues, usually with a whole lot of assistance and maybe some cheerleading. It's much better for your patient. Your patient stays warmer while they're moving around in the cave. The patient moving with assistance is much, much faster than being carried. And psychologically, it's better for your patient. When your patient is participating in their own rescue, then they develop a sense of progress and hope in their own rescue, and that can really serve them better physiologically as well. And then also they're better able to protect themselves if they're being assisted out of the cave where they have maybe an arm free. They're able to scratch their nose or protect their eyes or not bump into something. And then also it's better for your rescuers because they're less prone to injuring themselves. But So when we talk about, are we going to be able to walk this patient out, we need to decide what's wrong. So can we fix it? Is our patient just exhausted and they need like a really long break? We can give them some food. Are they a little hypothermic? Can we call it feed them, heat them, and beat them, right? Can we feed them some snacks and let them take a rest and get them warmed up, and then, you know, encourage them to move around because that will keep them warmer? So can we fix their problem? Can we patch their problem? Do we just need a simple splint or a bandage and we can help get them out of the cave with assistance? And then, is your patient mobile? So is your injury kind of on the minor-ish side or something that we can handle amongst our group? After that, your patient sets the pace. So if they're the ones sort of self-rescuing, then they get to decide how fast they move given their injuries. And then after that, it may take a lot of cheerleading and a lot of encouragement to help them along and keep them in a positive note with their injuries. Or are we going to carry out our patient? Some injuries make this a necessity. Examples are head injuries, if they have multiple injuries, if they have major fractures in either their pelvis or their femurs, or several major fractures. If you have concerns that they've hurt their back, if they've hurt their spine in some way. If they're unconscious or they're very altered, then that's going to be a reason why we may need to package them. And then if they have major bleeding or signs of shock. And when I talk about these things, ask yourself, do you think you could recognize those signs in a patient? If not, there are many ways that you can gain medical education, from first aid classes to getting like a wilderness medical certification. So for this particular kind of rescue, you are going to need help. The first thing that needs to be done is to send someone out of the cave to activate emergency services, whether that's 911 in your area or that you activate it someplace else because maybe you're too remote for that. This kind of rescue takes much, much longer. Imagine the heaviest cave pack that you've ever had to carry. Mine, I think, weighed close to 50 pounds one time. And then think about how much does that pack weigh compared to your own weight? If you had to carry somebody else out, that's going to be a lot more weight. And you're also going to need a lot more resources. You're going to need a lot more people. You need help carrying. You need people who can help plan and organize all of the people who are going to come to help. You need people who can help rig haul systems if it's a vertical cave. You're going to need a lot more equipment. I cave with a lot of cave rescuers on the reg for recreational trips, and even we don't bring a litter with us usually on a recreational cave trip. So you're going to need a lot more equipment to come in to be able to help you facilitate this rescue. And then also you need know-how. You need people who have education and experience and the skills to be able to help out with this rescue and make it run smoothly. So once you pick, walk out or carry out, are you stuck with that? No. Sometimes your patient changes. Sometimes your patient gets better. Sometimes they were exhausted and maybe they were hypothermic, but the snacks and everything, the blood sugar starts kicking in, and maybe they're able to start being assisted with their own rescue, which will help keep them warm. But conversely, maybe your patient starts not doing well. Maybe they start out able to be assisted, and then they have injuries that we can't see and they start to do worse, and we end up having to put them in packaging. And then also maybe the cave changes. Maybe you have sections of your cave that are easier to traverse than others. Maybe you end up having vertical halls and lowers at the beginning, and then the cave gets easier and then they can assist in their own rescue, or vice versa. So let's discuss. Meet Dav. Dav was caving with a friend. He wanted to leave the cave early, He totally knew the way out. He got lost. Then he got wet. I don't know if you guys can see the water in the back of that picture. And then he got cold, and then his light went out. When we find him, he's shivering. He's a little confused, a little lethargic. He says he's sleepy, and his knees hurt from crawling. Is Dav a walkout or a carry out? So we're going to take about a minute and use the chat feature to see what people think. So you guys can put your answer in the chat. And Sarah, if you can read some of those to me.
All right, we're getting a lot of walkout. It's going so quickly. Yeah, so walkout, heat him, feed him, and beat him. Walkout, walk. Thus far, it seems like everybody agrees about walkout.
No one has pity for Dav, huh?
Well, someone says package, but I think that was a joke. Mild hypothermia and exertion, so walkout after feeding. Could be a walkout if you get him some food, warm him up, make sure he doesn't have other issues, feed him first. Yeah, a lot of folks just say walk after maybe taking another action like feeding.
Okay. Well, everybody agreed with his rescuers. So Dav ended up walking out with assistance. His rescuers gave him some snacks. They opened up his bag. They found some snacks. They found some water bottles they weren't super sure about, but they got him some water. They got him some dry clothes. They got him an emergency blanket with hugs. And then they started making their plan. They patched his knees for blisters. That's why his knees were hurting from crawling. He had blisters on his knees and he didn't want to crawl anymore. So they bandaged his blisters up, which proving again that splinting and bandaging is very important skills for cavers to have. And then after that, Dav set the pace out of the cave. He took lots of rest breaks. And as you can see in the picture on the left, they also had a plan B standing by just in case. So meet Denisha. So Denisha was on a graffiti cleanup in a cave in Arizona, and she fell off her ladder. When she woke up, she can't move her left arm, and her right leg hurts really bad. She's very confused. She's slow to answer questions. Is Denisha a walkout or a carry out? So same game. We're going to put our answers in the chat. And Sarah, if you can read those off to me.
You bet. We're seeing a lot of carry out, spinal concerns, carry out, altered mental status means carry out, carry MOI as a fall, mechanism injury as a fall, concussion issues. A lot of people are kind of saying reasons why, maybe need a real head to toe, check Denisha out before moving, carry out for sure. Yep, that's what I'm seeing.
So Denisha's rescuers decided that this was a carry out as well. And so they sent someone out of the cave to start the 911 access. And then they someone had medical experience. And so they got started with some of the stuff that people talked about in the chat. So they gave her a much more thorough assessment, and they started to splint her leg. As you can see, there's somebody who was doing holding C-spine for the spinal considerations. So now that we've decided to carry out, now let's talk about how. So patient packaging, the definition in the Manual of U.S. Cave Rescue Techniques, the 3rd edition, says that patient packaging is just securing a person so they can be safely and efficiently evacuated from a cave. Our goals in patient packaging are getting the patient out of the cave either in the same condition, at least in the same condition, or maybe hopefully in better condition than we found them. At its very essence, it means we're going to wrap the patient up and lash them in a litter. There's lots of different ways that this can work. But the three main concepts of it is that you're basically going to keep them warm, keep them dry, and keep them from falling out. In rescue, there are so many different ways to package patients. Some of them are very simple. Some of them are very intricate. In cave rescue, our overarching system has three parts: underlashing, a thermal vapor barrier, and overlashing that depend on patient condition, cave topography, and cave climate. So let's talk litters for just a moment. There are lots of different types of litters. We have a few shown here. When I did a Google search for this, there were, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 different kinds of litters. The two most commonly seen in our cave rescue are the top two. So on the left, you have a Furno Model 71, and on the right, you have a Sked. In NCRs and at NCRC OCRs, the Orientation to Cave Rescues, and in all of the different levels, we deep dive into patient packaging, all of the different steps, all of the different options. But today, we're just going to talk about this in broad strokes. So let's talk about the three parts of the system first: the underlashing, the thermal vapor barrier, and the overlashing. So underlashing. So my first rescue instructor at my fire academy told me, you never want to lose that hot dog out of the bun. And so the underlashing is how I think of that. It secures your patient from sliding out the top or out the bottom. In the litter in cave rescue may move in many different directions. Sometimes you may be head down, sometimes you may be head all the way up and vertically hauling. Sometimes you're tilted at a 36-degree angle with the patient almost upside down, and just to make it through that tiny little notch and not scrape their nose. Then you have the thermal vapor barrier. So the goal here is to maintain a patient's normal body temperature. For the thermal barrier is usually inside or closest to the patient, inside the vapor barrier. And that's to protect the patient from losing body heat. So we need to consider, what's the temperature of our cave? Are we looking at a cave with like an average temperature of 34 degrees? So then we might be looking at a possibility of external hypothermia. But we also need to consider our patient's condition. So if our patient has multi-system trauma or they're showing signs of shock, then their cells may not be producing enough energy to keep them being a warm-blooded mammal. And so they might have a risk for what I call internal hypothermia. And then after that, we're talking about patient comfort. The vapor barrier is what you see on the outside of the patient in the picture. And that's to keep the rest of the packaging dry. So are we in a wet cave or are we in a dry, dusty cave? Is there going to be an extra thermal effect from our vapor barrier? And then after that, we're talking about patient comfort. So the main concept of a thermal vapor barrier, without getting into all the steps of the folding, is if you've ever swaddled a baby or rolled a burrito, then those concepts are pretty similar. You want to keep your fillings on the inside. And then after that, try to keep all of the barriers, both thermal and vapor, as smooth as possible. You don't want water to pool in creases and then end up getting into the packaging with the patient. And then sometimes those creases in the thermal barrier can turn into pressure points, because sometimes this is a really long ride for your patient. So there are a ton of different things you can use for thermal barrier materials. Many times, and in many of my pictures, you'll see that gray blanket that you see in the top left corner. But depending on the temperature of your cave, that may be way too heavy, and you can actually end up making your patient hyperthermic. If you happen to be camping in a cave, then maybe someone has a sleeping bag with them. Maybe somebody has extra clothes we can put on our patient. Fleece blankets work really well. Emergency blankets will work in a pinch. That yellow one is like a foam blanket that the medics in our area carry on their ambulances. And it's almost like a thermal vapor barrier in one. And then sometimes just getting their head covered. So don't forget that they can lose heat there as well. And then more and more, we're seeing thermal vests that can really help with to keep a patient's core heated. And then the same thing with vapor materials. So vapor barriers can come in all different shapes and sizes. It just needs to be enough to be able to wrap your patient completely. So you can use a camping tarp like you see on the right. On the left, that's actually a body bag. I wouldn't necessarily tell your patient that you're putting them in a body bag, but they do work great for vapor barriers. Plastic sheeting works really well. A rain fly from a tent, depending on the size of it, can work really well. And then I've successfully used a really large tablecloth, plastic tablecloth as well. We just need to be able to protect our patient from the moisture in the cave. And sometimes in Texas, we don't have that much. And then the overlashing. So this is going to help secure your patient and the thermal vapor barrier all together. A lot of times we try to secure somewhere around the knees, the hips, and the chest so that we secure all areas of the patient evenly. And then they may also need a foot loop to stand in if we're going to have to haul them vertically at all. So now that we talked about the parts, now we need to know, how do we know which parts or how much parts that we need? And so that depends on the patient condition, the cave topography, and the cave climate. So with patient condition, there's lots of things to consider. Do we need to modify any of that lashing, whether it's the underlashing or the overlashing, to accommodate injuries? Does our patient have a broken collarbone? Do we need to run our lashing so that it doesn't run straight over that injury? Depending on the kind of packaging, the kind of litter that we chose, do we need a helmet? Or is that helmet going to compromise their cervical spine or their airway? Do we need to haul the patient horizontally because of their injuries? And that can create, so that will be a different way to package for the rigging. And we'll have to take that into consideration when we're doing our lashing. And then what level of thermal protection is appropriate for this patient? Is our cave really cold? And so there's a real risk for hypothermia. Or is our cave pretty hot and our injuries maybe our patient's not showing shock signs, and so we're not super worried about that. But if we wrap them in a wool blanket and a heavy wool tarp for a really long time, then our patient could also get hyperthermic. And then after that, we really need to consider patient's comfort. How long are they going to be in this litter? I play patient a lot at our NCRC mock rescues, and right now my record is 7 hours in a sked. And so patient comfort after 7 hours becomes a real issue for your patient. And so we need to consider padding, and then we need to consider more padding. We need to consider that we might need to have access to recheck their injuries. Our next consideration for our 3 parts is the cave topography. So is this a horizontal or a vertical cave? Will we need to rig for halls and lowers? Or really, is this a subway tunnel lined in rocks? Or is this just going to be a straight carry out where we're just going to be walking on level ground until we reach the edge of the cave? In that case, there are some systems that use the buckles that come with the sked that are just basically like seatbelt buckles. So we may not need all of the lashing that we talked about before. Next, we need to talk about, will the litter fit through the passages to the exits? So we need to really consider what litters we're choosing, and do we need to stage a different kind of litter to be able to make it through maybe just one much smaller passage? Or can we stage like a bigger litter, a more comfortable litter, to be able to go through an easier section of the passage? Will our patient be much more comfortable that way? Is there water? Will the thermal layer need to be changed? You may need to stage multiple thermal vapor barriers throughout the cave if you're going to have to traverse through water. Or is there so much water that we need flotation? And then how much lashing do we need to be able to secure our patient? Because our main goal is to keep them from falling out. So here we have a haul with the litter through a real small hole. The litter was rigged appropriately for that, and the lashing made sure that our patient was going to be super secure during this section of our rescue, especially since the two guys you see below are going to have to help maneuver the patient through this hole. Here you see a rescuer who's ready to help with the litter coming through that little crack behind her. You can see a little bit of a light through that crack, and if I blew this picture up really big, you'd be able to see the patient's helmet. So imagine how you would have to turn the litter to be able to get them through this crack, and how would you have to do their lashing to make sure that they were going to be secure while they were traversing through this cave. So here you see a patient on a sked. He has extra protection because they suspect spinal injuries, and he has to go through a really small space. In Austin, we have many small spaces where we have to carefully consider packaging if we were to have a rescue, and how we would be able to accomplish securing and extricating our patients safely. Here's another. So consider, which litter would you choose for this South Austin cave? This is a slightly bigger passage in yet another one of our caves, but still, what litter would you have to choose? Which litter could you get through this passage? Do we need a flotation kit for a water crossing? Here, you can see that the water is kind of knee deep, and they might have been able to just carry him above the water, but that flotation actually helps the rescuers be a little safer as they're trying to traverse through this water and watch their footing, and then they can just float the patient. And then this one is a good example of the cave topography deciding what packaging you get to use. For some reference, I have to turn to the side to fit into this passage. I can't stand and look straight on. So let's talk about cave climate. Are we talking about a cold, wet cave? Are we talking about a hot, dry cave? A hot, wet cave? Do we have snow and ice? Is it a super muddy cave? And how does especially our thermal vapor barriers have to be able to accommodate? And so here we have a cave, and so we have some section that looks like it might need some vertical rigging, but also we have some water at the bottom, and this is a pretty wet section of the cave. So we definitely need to make sure, and our rescuers over there are wearing cave suits, so we would definitely have to, it's probably cold in there. We definitely have to make sure that we have enough thermal vapor barrier, and maybe some staged after this. Here, if you can see the rescuers, most of them are wearing short sleeves. This is a really warm cave that's also pretty dry. And so if we did really heavy thermal barriers and really heavy vapor barriers, we might end up making our patient, too hot. Here we have some ice. The guy who is going to talk next, Erdi Kartaya, has probably thought more about how to get people out of caves with ice than I ever have. So I'm sure he'll have a lot to say about that in our next talk. But just consider how you would have to be able to package your patient to keep them warm enough if this was going to be a really long extrication. And then super muddy. So this we need to protect our patient because we have a moisture problem. So we need to make sure that vapor barrier, but then also at some point, depending on the mud, we may end up having to change some of his packaging just because of the dirt and the mud and the water and stuff are eventually going to seep in. And then accessories. So we are responsible for protecting our patient. And so make sure your patient has some kind of eye protection if possible. Sometimes this can be some kind of safety glasses or sunglasses. I've been on plenty of recreational cave trips where somebody wore sunglasses by accident into the cave. So there might be some in someone's cave pack. Airway protection, a clean bandana over someone's mouth can really go a long way to be able to, if it's a dusty cave. If this is a carry out and the medical personnel on scene, they may want to place medical monitoring equipment on our patient before we wrap them up in their burrito. And then let's consider some more padding for our patient. Our patient's comfort is our patient's health and safety is our #1 concern, but their comfort should be our #2. And then we also need to make a plan for getting our patient's stuff out. Occasionally, you can use their cave pack as padding, but we need to make a plan to make sure that their stuff gets out with them because that will be a concern for them. And then lastly, I just want to talk real quick about advocacy. So your patient, once you put them in that burrito and you secure them, they're your responsibility. Being a patient can be really scary for people, or it can also be, they can be feeling guilty about having an accident altogether. And so they need an advocate. And so somebody should be the person who makes sure that they explain the plan to the patient about how they're going to get out, that every time they go through a passage that might be where the patient might have to be manipulated, you need to explain what's going on and make contact with them right before they go through, and then make contact with them again when they come out so that they know that they're not alone. In that you also need to make sure that we use their name and that everybody else uses their name too. It really does make a difference. I've had a couple of mocks where people told them my name ahead of time, and on my way out, all I heard was, "Carrey, it's going to be okay. Carrey, you're doing great. We're going to get you out of here." And I wasn't really injured, and it really, really, really helped. So I can only imagine it would help a whole lot more if you actually were injured. And then sometimes, if they're up to it, you can give them small jobs like holding on to a piece of medical equipment or remembering something that makes them feel like they're participating in their own rescue. And above all, just encouraging them and cheerleading them on the way out. So to sum up, we all love caving, but accidents do happen. And so once they do happen, we have decisions to make. We decide whether we can handle this, we can fix their problem or patch it up, and maybe we can walk them out. Or maybe we have to carry them out. And if we do, then we will get a lot more help. And if we're helping out with the packaging, then we understand that the system has 3 parts: underlashing, a thermal vapor barrier, and overlashing. And those parts depend on patient condition, cave climate, and cave topography. If you want more information, or you actually want to package somebody in a litter, then you should come to NCRC's OCR, Orientation to Cave Rescue, or Level 1 if you've never been. If you have been, then you can Level 2 and Level 3 also do a deep dive into patient packaging. I would like to give special thanks to anyone and everyone who allowed me to use their photos or their image in my own photos. The great state of Texas for helping me find my love of caving, and the crew of Austin Fire Department Station 31 B Shift, the pride of the North Side, for helping me get my patient packaging pictures. If you have questions for me, this is my contact information. And I really do talk about patient packaging kind of on the reg, so please feel free to contact me. I would love to talk about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carrey. Feel free, everyone, give a wonderful round of applause to Carrey. Thank you for that. I have to say, we already have questions for you. So luckily we have time for some of that. So one of the questions that came in during the presentation was from Carly, And it was, can a shocky patient self-rescue, or is it almost always a package?
I'm going to go with a solid, it depends. So this is where medical knowledge and experience comes in really handy. I can't answer that question without seeing the patient and being able to take some of their vital signs. And so, Carly, I'm sorry, I don't have a great answer for you. It kills me to have to say it depends, but it really does in this case. And so if you don't already have some medical education, then even just getting a first aid class will help quite a bit.
And if anybody else has questions, you can either feel free to write them in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute and ask your question verbally, that's also fine. Matt Brown would like to know minimum first aid kit and diagnostics tool recommendations.
So at work, when we are like the hasty medical team or something like that, then we go with like a 60-second assessment for people who are real hurt or real sick. And so we look for major bleeding. And so really that medical diagnostic tool is your hands, right? Checking for blood in all of the big areas, and like a full head to toe sweep. And then we have a stethoscope, right? So we listen to lung sounds. But barring that, right, you could probably like look, listen, and feel to make sure that they're breathing, and ask them how they're breathing. And then we take a pulse, right, at their radial pulse at their wrist. And if they don't have one of those, then we check the pulse at their neck. And we know that that is not as good as it might be. And so those are pretty easy diagnostic tools that anybody would have. My basic first aid kit has stuff to be able to bandage, and it has stuff that I can use that for multiple uses. So I have a SAM splint in there. It's a semi-rigid splint that you can mold into different ways. They're commercially available. I also have a type of tourniquet that is like a really big stretchy band that you would get from a PT, that if I'm not using it as a tourniquet, then I can use it to help bandage, just not too tight. And then I keep duct tape for securing. I keep plastic wrap because it also makes really good bandaging and I can see through it and it's waterproof. I keep a little bit of Advil, a little bit of Imodium. Those are mostly for personal use, but if it came down to it, those would help. And then I keep a Right-On Rain pad and a Sharpie to make sure that I can keep track of, like, your diagnostic tools don't matter. And or like if you're taking a pulse, if you're looking at the respirations, that kind of thing, it doesn't matter unless you have more than one set to be able to show a trend to somebody who's going to come along later. That was a really long answer. Sorry, Matt.
Actually, now that you mentioned it, Carrie, I remember the best splint that was ever put on one of my ankles during a mock rescue had plastic wrap involved, and it was one of the Austin Fire people. It was a great splint. It was fantastic. While we're waiting for any other questions to come in, I actually have one, and it kind of builds off Carly's. I know that you've been thinking a lot about this, and as have some other folks here, but are there, you said in the case of shock, perhaps it depends question. Are there any injuries that are an absolute immediate, you are putting this person in the litter and they are not going to come out until they come out of the cave?
You better look at you. No.
I only caught part of that, Sarah. I'm sorry.
No, sorry. I have to look over the mute buttons. Yeah, no, I was just asking, are there any injuries that you would say unequivocally, there is no it depends answer, like this person has to get a ride out?
So if I was doing like a head to toe, right, and pressing on them or palpating to see if I could find any, if I came across an unstable pelvis, that's an automatic, you get a ride. If I came across an unstable femur, that's an automatic ride. There are a lot of other things that people have extricated with. A very good friend of mine extricated with partially collapsed lung by accident. And she self-extricated. She didn't know until much later that she had a much bigger problem than she thought. And so, but those for sure are going to be, you're going to get a ride. Carl says compound fracture, automatic ride. Everyone kind of has a different opinion about this. Carl, I'm pretty sure you'd limp your way out on a compound fracture.
All right. Does anyone have any other questions that you'd like to take advantage of Carrey's deep thinking in patient packaging to ask right now?
Kevin, obviously unconscious, is going to get a ride. Sorry.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Well, Carrey, this is absolutely excellent. Let's give a good round of applause to Carrey once again. Thank you for this excellent talk. I'm going to pass it off to Gretchen now, who has a special announcement.
So I want to thank everyone for being involved in cave rescue and mention that we have someone here in the audience who has been a patient for a very long carry out, and that's Emily Davis. Next Wednesday is the 30th anniversary of Emily's spring break. And Emily, would you like to just say a little bit about that?
A lot of people have heard the story, but I just wanted everyone to know I was involved in cave rescue before I broke my leg in Lechuguilla, and I've been in cave rescue involved since. And I appreciate everyone who gets involved in cave rescue, because when you do expedition work, there's always that chance. When you're in unmapped, unvisited passage, rocks are loose. There are chances that one could hit you in the knee. You just never know. So thank you all. And if anyone is on that was on my rescue, I especially thank you. There were 90 cavers underground with me at some time or other, and I appreciated every single one of them.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Yeah, it just reinforces that if you do have to do a carry out, like Carrey mentioned, you're going to need a lot of people. And within the NCRC, we're ramping up to get lots of training going starting in the summer. And hopefully COVID will cooperate and we'll be able to get together and do lots of hands-on stuff. So